talk about how your childhood may affect your parenting behavior. After this class, you're going to be able to recognize that problems you experienced as a child may be affecting your relationship with your kids today. You'll be able to identify what's important about a special study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and you'll apply action steps to reduce the impact of adverse childhood experiences on you and your family. Dan Siegel, MD, author of Parenting from the Inside Out, says, in the absence of reflection, history often repeats itself, and parents are vulnerable to passing on to their children unhealthy patterns from the past. Understanding our lives can free us from the otherwise almost predictable situation in which we recreate the damage to our children that was done to us in our childhoods. This may come as a surprise to some of us. Our childhood will influence our children. We do pass on characteristics of relationships through generations. The way our children attach to us will be affected by what happened when we were young, unless we process and understand those overwhelming experiences from childhood. The Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs study, is one of the largest investigations that was ever conducted to look at the connection between maltreatment or problematic treatment in childhood and later in life health and well-being. What the Adverse Childhood Experiences study discovered was that there was several categories of harm to children that was done by parents, not on purpose, and typically passed on from generation to generation. The first category is abuse, and there's three ways of being abused: emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. The ACEs study, or Adverse Childhood Experiences study, also talked about neglect, both in the categories of emotional neglect and physical neglect. And the ACEs study also looked at household dysfunction, including mother being treated violently with aggression. Well over half of US adults have been exposed to adverse childhood experiences, and 2/3 of us have had at least one adverse childhood experience. If you're from a family of color or an LGBTQ family, or if you're an LGBTQ adult, or any other underrepresented and undersupported population in our country, you likely had more than the typical number of adverse childhood experiences. You were at greater risk for adverse childhood experiences. These are some of the physical problems that are increased by having adverse childhood experiences, and mental health problems are also increased. So the categories are emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, mother treated violently, household substance abuse, household mental illness, parental separation or divorce, or an incarcerated household member. So I want you just to take a moment and think about how many of these adverse childhood experiences did you have as a child, and recognize that these and even less intense adverse childhood experiences will affect how you relate to your child and how you teach your child to connect. And think for a minute about what's important about these for you. And let's talk about that. Adverse childhood experiences actually affects our brain development. Those early stressful experiences actually affect how your brain shapes. It helps us to survive difficult, harsh, and harmful environments by keeping us on edge and ready to confront threats. Sometimes that's called hypervigilance. It's always on guard, always waiting for the next catastrophe. It can also have the opposite effect, which is to shut down, to feel distant or detached from our own emotions and those of others. Sometimes these changes that helped us get through our childhood actually will impair our relationships today. So for example, we might see threats where none exist. We might overreact to situations, sometimes with aggression, and we might sometimes underreact and kind of sit back when people need contact from us. Those of us who experienced adverse childhood experiences may have higher testosterone, which is linked to aggression. It comes with that hypervigilance. We may experience, our brains may produce higher cortisol and adrenaline, the emergency hormones. We may be in a state of emergency as an everyday experience. There may be more activity in our amygdala, that fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain. We may have lower activity in the neocortex, the thinking, data collection, logical decision-making part of our brain. It may be hard for us to remember things. It may be hard for us to make logical decisions. We may experience more depression and anxiety, and that might look like reduced or increased interest in food, lower sociability, and a tendency to give up when faced with a challenge. Sometimes those of us who experienced adverse childhood experiences are hyper independent. It's hard for us to reach out for help, and it's hard for us to accept help. We think we have to do it on our own. We might have difficulty calming down when we're stressed, and we might have, more intense episodes of temper and feelings of impatience. And we might have difficulty reading others' emotions and judging the needs of the people we love, including our children, because we had to be independent. We had to take care of ourselves. We may have difficulty reading our children's emotional needs. And many of us will have difficulty modeling self-care and coping skills and positive behavior for our kids because we've been so much in these survival strategies. So what can you do about adverse childhood experiences and minimize the impact of those on your children? The good news is that lifestyle can change the effects of these adverse childhood experiences. The most important thing to keep in mind is that touch, attunement, and relationship connections really help. When we have face-to-face contact with someone and look into someone's eyes, we literally release these neurotransmitters in our brain that protect us in the moment and in the future. It increases oxytocin, it generates dopamine. These are the feel-good chemicals in our brains. It's dopamine is one of the things that we take antidepressants to create, but eye-to-eye, face-to-face contact can increase that biology in our brain, and it lasts after the contact, and it does it for the person who we're with, including our children, and it lowers the stress hormones like cortisol. That face-to-face contact literally lights up the reward center of our brain. It regulates stress, and if we don't have these kinds of connections, we're going to look for rewards and seek stress regulations through substances or food, and that's what leads to addiction. One of the underlying foundations of addiction is the effects of our childhood leading us to not look for connection and attunement because we're in that state of fear or hypervigilance, and we turn to substances or activities for that reward in our brain. It doesn't work as well, and it leads to addiction. Lifestyle changes can really impact the effect of ACEs, including spending time with others that you enjoy, staying in contact with important people in your life, even if you don't feel inclined to do it anyway. Doing gratitude practices. In our family, we would just hold hands at dinner and say one thing we appreciate about the day. You can do a gratitude journal. You can do a gratitude journal with your child. It literally changes your brain chemistry. You can think about those activities that are comforting to you and also healthy. So going for a walk in the woods is very comforting to me. It changes my mood. Just going outside can change my mood. Certain relationships, certain things or places are comforting to you, and you want to seek them out. Allow yourself to cry and release your vulnerable emotions and find things that make you laugh. Learn healthy ways to cope with stress that will turn down that stress response and build resilience. You can learn what are age-appropriate activities for your child and behavior so you can better understand when they're misbehaving, and learning approaches that you can use when things are challenging with your kids. That can help also. Make time to relax, make time to have fun, focus on enough sleep, exercise, eating, and mindfulness practices. And finally, seek out mental health professionals. The deal is that these self-care activities are medicine for those of us that grew up with adverse childhood experiences, and they're necessary. They're not they're not selfish. They're essential for you to be a healthy person and a positive parent. Even if you're taking parenting classes, if you're not coping with stress, if you're not turning down that stress response, if you're not building your resilience and practicing self-care, you won't be able to think clearly enough to actually apply what you're learning. So the Buddha says, you yourself, as much as anybody else in the entire world, deserve your love and affection. Take time to reflect, talk with the people in your life who are important to you and who you trust. Talk about these issues and be tenderhearted towards yourself. Take one step at a time and begin again in this process as often as you need. So we hope that you'll be taking away some important ideas from this class. You're vulnerable to passing on problems from your childhood to your children. Even if you try to forget about them or not talk about them or say they're in your past, they may unconsciously come forward in your reactions and your behaviors. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are associated with physical and mental health problems in adults. Brain changes from ACEs may cause you to overreact or shut down or having trouble thinking clearly. You may have difficulty modeling positive behavior from your children, and lifestyle changes and support can turn down that stress response and increase your resilience. Thank you so much for being here for this important class. Remember to print out your handouts, and if you have any questions or need more support, please sign up for a live class, attend our monthly Q&A session, join our private monitored Facebook group where you can post questions and get lots of support from other parents and teachers, and consider a private one-on-one coaching session to focus on some specific parenting challenges. At any time, you can email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com, and we'll connect you up with the just right resources. Thanks so much for being here.